I would like to give a warm welcome to this report as well, and the general approach which the Minister has brought to this. This is a series of measured and practical steps, I think, to go towards achieving the ultimate ambition of 1 million Welsh speakers by 2050, but I'd also like to commend him on the eloquence with which he concluded his statement about the reasons for supporting the Welsh language and embedding it in the culture of the people of Wales, even in those areas where it has long since disappeared as the everyday language of the people. And I think that's exactly the right approach to bring to this. And it's useful, I think, to have somebody doing this job who didn't grow up to speak Welsh at home and has learned the language. And it will be the great challenge of the future to convince the English monoglots section of the population, which is by far the greater at the moment, that this is an adventure in which we must all take part. So I agree with what the document says, is that, in particular, that the government strategy can't force individuals to use the language, and for the language to truly flourish, we're counting on each and every one of us to embrace the idea of a bilingual Wales. And so we have to carry the people with us and go with the grain of public opinion, but also to lead it as well. And I would, in this context, also like to commend Plaid Cymru's contribution, which we debated last week in this document, Reaching the Million, and the importance, initially at any rate, of ensuring that we retain a robust social heartland for the Welsh language in the West and in the North. But it is important for us also to have a strategy for breaking out of the traditional areas which are still largely Welsh-speaking, because we don't want to see the Welsh language largely confined to what you might call a lager within our own country. And if we are to succeed in our ultimate objective, then we do have to convince people who don't hear the Welsh language spoken on a daily basis at home or in their communities, that this is worth making an effort to engage in. The great challenge now will come, of course, in WESPs, in areas which pose these greater challenges. And we must certainly do our best to avoid the kind of confrontation that we saw, sadly, in Llangennech in the last year. And we must work harder in those circumstances to convince people that it's not going to set children back to learn through the medium of Welsh. What Simon Thomas said the other day about the value of learning another language, whether it be Welsh or any other language, is absolutely true. At school I learned 3 languages, German, French and Russian, as well as Welsh, although I had to give up Welsh in order to do one of the others. We don't do that today. I don't know whether that has made me a more intelligent person as a result, or a more eloquent person, but it has certainly added several dimensions to my life, which I'm pleased to have. And so there is a value in this beyond the nuts and bolts arguments of economics that we've heard about, which are important, but to be honest, given that English is the lingua franca of the world generally, it's going to be a problem for all other languages, in a sense, to compete with it in international commerce and the world of the internet. But we've got to bring reassurance to parents that this is something which is of value to children. We've seen a collapse in the teaching of modern languages generally in the United Kingdom, not just in Wales. In recent years, the British Council did a survey only 2 years ago, which found that only 22% of pupils take GCSEs in languages other than English or Welsh. That, I think, is deplorable, because languages are seen to be difficult. Well, amongst the languages that I've studied, Welsh actually is a rather less complex language to learn. The vocabulary is smaller. Words are made to do more things in Welsh than other languages. We don't have problems of cases and conjugations and so on. And it should, with a bit of effort, be an easier language to absorb and learn, say, a language like Russian, which I mentioned earlier on. So this is an important step, but what has also been said about the importance of the earliest years can't be overestimated. And I would like to commend the work done by Mudiad Maithrin in this respect, and the ambition to see 150 new cylchoedd, 3 to 4 year olds, is the beacon of hope, I think, for language, because the other interesting thing which I discovered from the Plaid Cymru report was that 18.8% of 3 to 4 year olds were Welsh speaking in 2001. That had risen by 5% to 23.3% in 2011. Be interesting to know, if we could, what the figure is now, to what extent we're making progress along this road. The ambition in this document of having 35% is an important intermediate step, I think, and so I commend the approach which the Minister has to that. So, if we are to succeed in this objective, it is in embedding the language in the earliest years when we are the most absorbent. I can tell you from my own experience that at the age of 68 it's much more difficult to recover vocabulary, let alone learn new words, than it used to be. So I think it's important for us to realise that there is an overwhelming consensus in the Assembly behind this approach, but that consensus is not reflected to the same extent outside, and therefore we all have to play our part in bringing people on board this exercise. And certainly on behalf of my own party, I'll say we will hope to play our part in this as well, because I think we can be useful to the government in this respect, as representing part of the community that isn't normally associated with the adventure on which we are all now embarked.
I'm grateful to you for your kind remarks and for the welcome you've given the statement, and both the approach and the tone that we have used in moving this policy forward. You describe the policy as an adventure, or a strategy as an adventure. It's certainly a journey, and it's an exciting journey. And it's exciting because it isn't going to be those of us in this chamber here who determine its success. It's going to be the parents who take individual decisions. It's going to be the parent who decides to use Welsh with a child to transmit the language through the generations. A parent who decides to send their children through the Welsh medium system, or the parent who helps their child doing their Welsh homework in an English medium school, or the people who change the language that they use when they're in a rugby club or in a pub or wherever it happens to be. The people who actually make an effort to use the language on a daily basis and to ensure that future generations use the language. And I hope that in doing so, the country itself, which has been on one journey with a language, will go on another journey in a different direction with a language. My own family moved to Tredegar at the turn of the last century, and they were entirely Welsh-speaking when they moved from Aberystwyth to work in the collieries of South Wales, and they lost the language, and the language died like a fault line in the family before the Second World War. And now we're seeing my children, my parents' grandchildren, learning and speaking Welsh as a first language and regaining the language, and the language is reborn in the family. And I hope in the same way we'll be able to see that in many families and in many different parts of Wales. I know the Education Secretary shares a very similar family journey herself, and I hope that in that way we will not simply see the language as acquiring only a skill, but also win hearts and minds of people across the country. And we will move away from the sense of if you win, I lose, a zero-sum game that we've seen all too often in the past, where if we speak Welsh when we exclude people who speak English, and a bilingual policy is Welsh speakers being forced to speak English. So we need to move away from those sorts of contradictions, and we need to move away from that approach and that tone of debate. And in doing so, it is a journey that we will embark upon as a country. I have already been speaking through our officials to the local authorities across Wales on their own strategic plans for Welsh. As I said in answer to a previous question, I will be making a statement on that and making an announcement on that in the next few weeks. But I hope that we will reassure parents, but also inspire parents and inspire people to learn the Welsh language, to enjoy using Welsh, not to worry about getting every mutation right and every issue of grammar correct, but to enjoy using the Welsh language and to feel comfortable using the Welsh language and to feel comfortable doing it socially as well as professionally. And we start that in the early years. And I hope that the experience that parents will have of a good experience of their child learning 2 languages early in life is something that will stay with them and enrich them in their lives in a way that it's enriched me and my family in our lives.
Lee